All right, well, welcome everyone. For those of you that may not know me, I am Greg Whitcup, director of both Cranbrook Art Museum and the Center for Collections and Research. It's a real pleasure to welcome you all to Cranbrook today, although I'm sure many of us wish we were someplace a little warmer. A sunny day in Michigan with a fresh snowfall at Cranbrook. It doesn't get much better, so we have to enjoy it, right? Yes, exactly. So let's get started here. Founded in 1977 with the mandate of seeking to express the quality and diversity of drawing as a major art form, the Drawing Center in New York is the nation's leading voice for the expressive potential of not only works on paper, but certainly under the direction of our speaker today, also is actively defining what drawing means in the 21st century. Conceived by Martha Beck, a former assistant curator of drawings at the Museum of Modern Art, who passed away last month, the museum opened in a warehouse on Green Street in Soho before it moved to its present location on Worcester Street in the late 1980s. Its mission was to reflect what Beck saw as museums' long-standing neglect of drawings. If paintings and sculptures represented the grand narratives of fine art, she said drawings were the original flashes of insight that led to them, the intimate, direct, and experimental state of an artist's creative process, as she put it. Following in the footsteps of Martha Beck, Anne Philbin, who now directs the Arm & Hammer Museum in Los Angeles, and Catherine DeZager, Brett Littman assumed the post of executive director of the Drawing Center 7 years ago in 2007, becoming the institution's fourth director. Brett brought with him not only years of experience as a writer, critic, and administrator, with a particular interest in the field of crafts and process, but also several years of experience as the deputy director of MoMA PS1, where he managed 5 departments and oversaw the enormously successful Warm Up Summer DJ Festival and WPS1.org radio. As the Drawing Center's executive director, Brett oversees all aspects of running and programming the museum, and he managed and oversaw the center's $11 million capital campaign and building expansion, which was completed a year ago in November 2012, just in the wake of Hurricane Sandy. As a curator, Brett has organized noteworthy exhibitions for many institutions, including a whole variety of projects for the Drawing Center, ranging from Greta Magnan Grossman, Lighting and Furniture, to Leon Golub, Live and Die Like a Lion, which was awarded Best Show in a Nonprofit Gallery, the award by the International Association of Art Critics in 2010. More recently, Brett organized Guillermo Kitka Diarios, the inaugural exhibition for the center's newly expanded space, and Alexis Rockman, Drawings from the Life of Pi, which was on display in the fall. His current exhibition, Ferran Adrià, Notes on Creativity, is the first exhibition to explore the drawings of the world-renowned chef from El Bulli. To help us celebrate our own drawing exhibition, My Brain is in My Inkstand, Drawing as Thinking and Process, and launch the exhibition's catalog at 3 o'clock today, it is both an honor and a pleasure to welcome Brett Littman to Cranbrook.
Thank you, Greg. Very, very happy to be at Cranbrook. And today I'm going to give a lecture which I hope will be a little bit of a provocation in terms of thinking about the traditional ways that drawing is often framed in the museum world. The title of my lecture is From Lascaux Caves to AutoCAD, and that actually comes from the Paul Rand book, From Lascaux to Brooklyn. If any of you know Paul Rand, the great industrial and graphic designer. jokingly, I say a brief history of drawing. It will, I was thinking a lot about TED lectures and seeing whether or not I can do this in 15 minutes, but unfortunately it goes on for a little longer than that. I think in this lecture what I want to point out are some of the deeper philosophical issues that we're dealing with at the Drawing Center, what drawing means maybe in the 21st century, and I am going to ask you in the beginning part of this lecture to actually be engaged with me by raising your hand. I'm going to ask some questions. So, I'm going to begin. The question I'm going to ask, very simply, of the next about 10 slides is, are these things drawings? This is the work of Sterling Ruby. Sterling is a sculptor and also an artist who works fairly large scale. Sterling, this is actually a paintball shield, and Sterling works in many mediums, ceramics, paper, and also styrofoam, and this piece in particular came after a long reflection of the idea of mark making and the relationship of mark making to drawing. So the question is, do you think this is a drawing? Okay, very few hands. Good. This is the work of Susan Afuna, an artist that we showed at the Drawing Center. This is a video of the process of making a drawing on the floor of the gallery. Is this a drawing? Okay, some more hands. The piece later was turned into a dance performance. She had collaborated with a choreographer named Luca Vighetti, and essentially for 3 nights, 3 dancers erased her drawing, and then she would make the drawing again in the morning, and they would come and erase it a second time and then a third time. So is this a drawing? Okay, about 50-50. This is the work of Gertrude Goldschmidt, otherwise known as Gego, a Venezuelan artist. Gego was interested in what she called these wire constructions, not wire sculptures, and primarily her work was about the unregistration of the shadow behind the sculpture. So the sculpture itself was built, installed, and the most complex thing of working with Gego's work is actually lighting. So for her, these were actually constructions that made drawings on the wall. The drawings could change depending on the lighting, depending on the installation. So the question again is this a drawing? This is the work of Len Lai, Free Radicals. Len Lai was a very early direct filmmaker, meaning that he scratched or drew directly on celluloid and then projected that through 16mm projectors. I'm sorry, the soundtrack seems to have disappeared, but there is a soundtrack of African drumming that goes with this piece. So would this be considered a drawing? Okay. This is the work of John Kessler, an artist who is primarily known for very large-scale kinetic installations that include TV cameras that are recording things live, surveillance, images from the internet, automatrons, and John had done a series of collages at a space called Dieudonné, where he took cut-up magazines and essentially atomized the idea of what it means to make an image in mass media. This is all done with paper pulp, and the actual scraps of magazines are pressed into the paper pulp so it becomes one surface. Would you consider this a drawing? Okay, less people, fewer. This is the work of Matt Mullikin, an artist who has done many performances under hypnosis as that guy. That's a kind of avatar. He has done a series of drawings that are also under hypnosis. And this is an exhibit. This is a clip from a performance he did at Artissima in 2009. Often he has blackboards and or pieces of paper at a desk and draws. Oh, so we have someone who's very vocal who thinks maybe this is a drawing. So again, the question is, could we consider this a drawing? Okay. This is the work of William Anastasia. William is an artist who was working pretty actively in the mid-60s, 70s, fairly conceptual in the way he approaches things. This piece is a paint pour where he stands on top of a ladder with a full gallon of black paint, pushes the gallon of paint against the wall, and then just simply pours it down the wall. Could we consider this a drawing? Okay. This is the work of Sun Zun, a Chinese artist. Sun Zun worked with thousands of discarded Chinese newspapers and drew on them and then made stop-motion animation films using those newspapers. This is a more later piece from 2010 called 21G, but all of the cells are made by hand, and also this is put together through stop animation. So these can be exhibited both as drawings or as film. So the question again is this a drawing? Okay. And the last work we're going to look at is from an exhibition that I had done called Drawing and Its Double. This is actually a Vasi copper plate, a copper matrix from the archive of the Calcografia in Rome. They have 25,000 copper matrices for printing, dating back to 1492 to the present. In my exhibition, I showed the copper plates only, no prints, no preparatory drawings. Can a printing plate be considered a drawing? Okay, so maybe we have the most people who think this might be a drawing. The reason why I ask all of these questions is all of the artists that I've just shown you have shown at the Drawing Center in the past 7 years. So if you have hesitations or you're not sure whether or not these things are drawings, this might give a sense of the kind of exploration that we're trying to do at our institution in terms of really understanding what drawing is and asking a very fundamental question about how drawing operates in the contemporary art world today. I think our approach at the Drawing Center is absolutely to explore drawing in a non-medium specific way. And by that I simply mean traditionally drawing departments are works on paper departments, and drawing is often defined simply as pencil on paper. I think since the inception of the Drawing Center in 1977, we've pushed against that definition, and we've moved in lots of different kinds of directions, both sculptural, to sketch, to notational drawings. And for me, it's incredibly important to today maybe recognize that drawing might simply be an activity that is not medium-based. There have been many examples recently of talks that we've done. For instance, Pat Steer, the artist who's on our board, gave an incredible talk at the Drawing Center called Everything I Do is a Drawing, and basically explained as a painter that primarily her concerns are drawing concerns. I think there are many sculptors for whom their concerns are drawing concerns. There are many artists who draw whose concerns are painting concerns. We live in a time of fungibility and, in a way, fluidity between mediums. And our institution is definitely at the forefront of trying to explore those kinds of gray areas where essentially we've been asking the question, is this thing a drawing? And I actually think there are three answers: yes, no, and maybe. And we've tended to really look recently at the idea of, if the answer is no or maybe, we may want to show that more so than we may want to show if our gut reaction was that this thing is absolutely a drawing. It's not about being provocative. It's not about trying to annoy people. But I think actually what it is that we're beginning to understand that the parameters and boundaries of what this activity, medium, the way in which artists work can be fully explored in the next 10 to 15 years. That said, we do take an approach to exhibition making that problematizes the accepted definitions of drawing. We also, in a way, for instance, the show that I did about the copper plates are the exact obverse of all the things we think about drawing. They are not immediate, they're drawn backwards, they're about mass reproduction. So traditionally, the kind of more poetic terms that we think about when we think about drawings are the artist's hand, the mark measuring kind of the soul or the intention of the artist, the idea of immediacy, the kind of Picasso napkin sketch. But when you start to pull some of those planks away, and then you look at something that has line and deals with maybe shadow and some of the kind of core primary values of maybe what drawing is about, you end up with a much more complex discussion about the medium itself. For me personally, the first contemporary drawing is most likely the erased de Kooning by Rauschenberg in 1953. Encoded in this drawing are all the problems of drawing since in the contemporary field. It's about appropriation. He's taken a de Kooning drawing and then he's erased the image. This is the artwork. In some ways, we think about drawing as objects that might be finely rendered, that are usually about presence rather than absence. And I think that, again, for me, the erased de Kooning points to a kind of basis for discussion. It is obviously one of the most deconstructive drawings that made in the 20th century, but it does frame a discussion for the Drawing Center in terms of how we're going to look at the medium. And out of maybe erased de Kooning are some recent areas of focus. We run our institution a little bit like a think tank. We don't have any specific agenda in terms of art history. And I think that since my time at the Drawing Center, we've moved away from a more defensive position, which is that for many years our institution was planting the flag and saying drawing is important, it has credibility, it should be shown in museums and galleries. There's a funny moment I had when MoMA had the Mira Schindel Leon Ferrari show. They had the Rothschild collection up, and I happened to have lunch with Glenn Lowry, and I said, thank you. And he said, why? And I said, all of MoMA is drawing. I mean, this is what Martha Beck, our founder, was fighting against, which was that MoMA wanted to put all the drawing shows in a closet on the second floor. So in some ways, drawing has arrived, and I decided when I became director that maybe we should move away from a defensive position to a more speculative and exploratory position about the medium itself. So we've been focusing our shows, not exclusively, but a couple of planks that we've been looking at are drawing from source material, drawn language, informational, notational, and diagrammatic drawings, and the relationship between drawing technology and new media. So first I want to show you some images from shows that we've done where artists are drawing from source material. There is a little bit of a story when I did the Leon Golub exhibition. Leon, as an artist, actually never kept a sketchbook, but what Leon did keep, if you know his work, was an archive of cutout images from magazines that took up about 7 or 8 full filing cabinets. These folders were very well organized, and it could be man with gun in right hand, and there could be 100 pictures from mercenary, magazines and from other kinds of magazines of people with guns in their right hand, man lying on floor, man running, a woman relaxing, whatever it was. And there were quite a few, thousands of these folders in the flat files. Leon then took those images, and even though he was trained at Art Institute of Chicago and surely understood how to draw well and had a Beaux-Arts education right after the Second World War, he would take those images and tape them up on his large unfinished linen canvases, and he would start drawing out the image in chalk and blowing that up from a small cutout, sometimes an 8.5 by 11, sometimes a little teeny picture. And what I found that was fascinating is that for Golub, there was no drawing. Actually, the paintings themselves were drawings. That's the conclusion that I came to. And the work that I showed happened to be late work in which Golub could no longer physically make large paintings and had to start making drawings on oil stick that were about the same size as an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. So that there was this now all of a sudden conflation between the original source material and the size of the drawing. And I found that quite fascinating. For many artists today, working in a sketchbook, actually drawing things before they make them, is no longer the way that they build their images if they're painting or doing other things. They may be looking at old photographs. They may be taking images off the internet. They may be manipulating images on the internet as drawing. The first work that I'm going to show you is from Gertrude Goldschmidt's demonstration drawings. Gertrude is not known as someone who draws. Many of you may know of him as the relational aesthetics artist who serves as Thai food in galleries and museums. But Gertrude had done a very interesting project which actually had a much broader social agenda. He had found that there were many young artists who come out of school in Thailand who then go to shopping malls and draw caricatures of people. These artists were trained as fine artists, but of course there was no real gallery and support system for them. So Gertrude started emailing them images of demonstrations from major newspapers around the world, and whoever responded first would get $150, and they would make a drawing of that demonstration from the newspaper exactly in a one-to-one scale, and then send it back to Gertrude. By the time we engaged with Gertrude, he had about 700 drawings in this series, made over the course of about 6 to 7 years. He took a lot of the money from selling these works and invested it back in building a school and a residency program for these artists that were making these drawings in Thailand. When we showed this work at the Drawing Center, it was probably one of the most controversial shows that we had done. When you take the artist hand away from the idea of drawing, it's a big question as to what you're left with. Gertrude did not make any of them. It is under his name, however. And to me, what it was really a true meditation on drawing style, because you had about 15 different artists who were working with these images and redrawing them. But I have to say that our audience was not particularly pleased with this exhibition as a concept. Frank Selby was in an exhibition called Drawn from Photography, in which Claire Gilman, our curator, looked very carefully at a trend that we had noticed where artists were drawing from photographs. Again, strangely, Frank was looking at a lot of photographs that were of demonstrations, but particularly American political moments that maybe, he's a little younger than I am, probably about 36, 37, and I think that he felt these images had been pretty hackneyed at the time, and that he didn't have a way into them. Claire's whole show and whole premise was that artists were drawing from these source materials in order to reclaim these moments. Frank might work on these drawings for 6 to 8 months at a time, so this is not a fast process. He's not sketching these out in a day. And it's fascinating to think about the idea of drawing as a way to reclaim. I mean, if drawing is mimetic, meaning copying, again, it kind of changes the way that we look at drawing in terms of the idea of immediacy and the idea of artist intention. Similarly, we showed in that exhibition Richard Forster. Richard's process is even slower than Frank's. Richard did a series of drawings in which he goes from Saltburn to Middlesbrough in the northeast part of the UK, between his studio and his home, and he took a lot of photos of these disappearing coal mines, and then would painstakingly, over the course of sometimes a year and a half, make fairly small-sized drawings of the photographs. Again, Richard's basis for doing this kind of work was the idea of trying to hold on to something that was disappearing in the world itself. And by drawing it and spending time, it was about a kind of reclamation of the image. Ewan Gibbs, also another artist and drawn from photography, generally takes fairly banal tourist images that appear in brochures or that he finds on the internet. And he has a slightly different technique. He uses either slashes, circles, or some kind of graphic mark to build the image. So this Macy's image is kind of like a moire pattern. It's almost impossible to see, but if you see Ewan's work up close, it could just simply be thousands of small circles drawn at slightly different densities. So he has a different approach to it, but still these are done over long periods of time. We had done an exhibition with Gerhard Richter a couple of years ago, and Gerhard in 1964 said that drawing was not a legitimate art activity, and basically, even though he made about 500 drawings over the course of his career, and there is a catalog raisonné, and there are many museums that collect his drawings, if you know Gerhard's style of working, he always worked from source material. He never freehand drew anything. This is a very important early drawing, 1968, called Mountain, and this drawing is made from an image that he took driving around in his car of a small mountain in Germany, which then he used an overhead opaque projector, projected it on the paper, and sketched out the form of that photograph. I think for Richter, his drawings are always what I would describe as being asymptotic. I mean, many people came to this exhibition because no one really knows in the US Gerhard's drawings. They're very rarely shown. He's quite hesitant about any museum engaging with them. In the big show that Rob Storr did at MoMA, there were no drawings in that exhibition. So just to give a sense of how private they are. And I think people expected to see these beautifully rendered Gerhard Richter paintings or abstract drawings that would be kind of one-to-one relationship with what we know about his painting. But that's not what we showed. We showed works kind of like this, and also a work that I find quite interesting, which maybe distills down Gerhard's whole feeling about drawing. This is a drawing made with a drill in 1966, and this is probably his attempt to totally break free of the idea of rendering and skill. So, you know, there's a lot of discussion in the art world about this term de-skilled, meaning something that might be childlike, folk, naive, not done in a style that could be considered quote-unquote good. And I think for Richter, the drill drawing was an attempt to actually destroy the whole history of drawing Western history up until that point. We've been looking a lot at drawn language. You know, there's a lot of debate about whether or not when we write, that is a form of drawing, or is it a graphic or semantic thing that we're doing? Are we actually expressing content? There is a term called a semic, which is drawing, something that looks like drawing but has no semantic content. So we've done two shows recently, Drawing Time, Reading Time, and also an exhibition of Emily Dickinson's and Robert Valser's manuscripts. This is the work of Nina Papakonstantinou, Greek artist, and this is Virginia Woolf's novel written all on one page. So she's taken the whole novel and actually wrote the novel going down the page, and then wrote it again until she completed the whole novel on one page. This is an example of the Emily Dickinson poem fragments that we showed at the Drawing Center a couple of months ago. Many of these poem fragments are from the late poems that she did. These poems were written in pencil because Dickinson had some problems when she wrote in pen. It actually took too much energy for her, so she liked the pencil, and a lot of these fragments were done on very uniquely shaped pieces of paper. We were not making the argument that these are artworks, but we were making the argument that you have to look at the formal aspects of these works in order to understand Dickinson's content. I would go as far as saying that since I studied poetry, if you know anything about Dickinson and her enjambment and her line breaks, that these are incredibly illuminative documents in terms of understanding maybe some of the ways in which she composed. Valser, on the other hand, wrote what are called microscripts. The size of this piece of paper is maybe about this big, so it's teeny. These are actually written in an old German script. It took many years. He was actually writing most of these in an insane asylum in Switzerland, which he had checked himself into, and he was a schizophrenic. Many people actually didn't understand that these could be translated, but over the course of the 20th century, many of these novels and microscripts have been translated now, and there's a clear understanding that Valser actually was writing language, narrative. Serkanovskaya was in an exhibition that we did, also drawn from photography. His contribution to that particular exhibition was to hand copy Claire's essay in the typeset for the catalog. So when you opened up the catalog, you actually read Claire's essay as a drawing. And it was about a 20-page essay. So he painstakingly recopied in the font her piece. But Serkan has done a lot of work with newspapers. This is actually the front page of the Courier-Journal, Louisville, Kentucky, from 2009. And Serkan was able to get a commission where they sent him the front page of the newspaper, and in about 8 hours, he had to hand draw it, and then they printed it, the front page of that newspaper, as a drawing that particular day. He also did a project with the New York Times. as well, where one of the pages of the New York Times, a portion of the page, was hand-drawn. This is a show that we did with Paris, a very well-known graphic design team. They collaborate a lot with artists, and for every project, they hand-draw their own fonts, so that they never use any existing font. Every font has to be developed for the project. When we worked with them, at first it was going to be a kind of survey of the fonts, but actually they decided that they wanted to make furniture. And if you notice, the furniture looks like words. It is words. And it says, just like an ant walking on the edge of... I actually forgot. Sorry, I can't remember what the last word is. But in any case, the point being that this was something that their drawing teacher in college had told them that drawing was, kind of metaphor. During this installation, and this is a photo of the installation at the Drawing Center in our gallery that we had at 40 Worcester, we held many drawing classes. So the idea were the stools were the site for the drawing classes, and that people would activate the piece by coming in, and we had people like Liam Gillick and other artists come and teach drawing and use those stools as the site for the class. Also in Drawing Time, Reading Time are Karl Andre's typewriter drawings made in 1972. There's a question as to whether or not concrete poetry, Apollinaire, Andre, you know, we can look at Jackson McLough, other practitioners, American, European, whether or not these things can be considered drawings. We'd also done a show of Ignacio Uriarte, a young Spanish artist who primarily makes typewriter drawings, and he feels that they are definitely in the camp of drawings, not poems, not visual, not paintings, not anything else. Seanlanders is probably the best example in the Drawing Time, Reading Time show of the kind of slippage between form and content. This is the piece called Sick, which is a novel, handwritten novel on legal pads. It's 451 pages long. It was produced in 1993 as a facsimile, so when you got the book, it was actually a handwritten book. It is an autobiographical piece. It is a very difficult piece to read. It is quite self-lacerating, self-deprecating, and it turns out in the middle of it, he actually has an affair on his wife, and he divorces her, and it's a kind of meditation on failure. That said, the piece also exists as a kind of almost minimalist formal piece, and we displayed all 451 pages on a large wall. And so, of course, you can't read every page because there's some pages that are about 12 or 13 feet up in the high on the ceiling. But it is interesting how this work kind of moves fluidly between a novel, a narrative, and maybe a serial artwork. Mirta Dermasaka was an artist who was working in Argentina, very much alongside Mira Schindel, who was in Brazil, and Leon Ferrari. This was not the best example. I couldn't find the picture that I really wanted, but she did a lot of work that looked like newspapers, but of course with the systemic writing, so you would look at it, and from far away it looks like columns and it lays out like a newspaper, but as you get closer you realize that it's just simply marks. This is an example of a letter. She did also a series of systemic letters, and actually some of those were sent to other people as a kind of method of communication. So, you know, the idea again is, when we look at this, are we looking at something that is readable? Is it composition only? Is it form? Where does it sit? And also, is it drawing? An exhibition that I worked on, Uxcellar Salon, a Turkish artist who has been in France since 1960. Uxcel's process is that he reads novels or books or philosophical texts, sometimes for 3 to 4 years at a time. This particular drawing is from his reading of Marx Das Kapital. It took him 4 years to complete the book. He keeps very detailed notebooks where he's pulling out text and making preparatory drawings. And then he makes his own pigments using ancient techniques, also including his bodily fluids, and actually prepares the paper and draws these incredibly complicated visualizations of the text itself. This particular drawing, which you can't really tell the scale, it's quite large. I mean, maybe about 40 by 60. It took Uxcell about 1.5 years to complete it. So it also kind of in that drawing from the idea of reclaiming the image itself, these are painstakingly done. This is a short film that I made with Guillermo Cuitca. This is shot in Guillermo's studio in Argentina. The exhibition that I did was called Diarios, and it basically was showing the tabletops that Guillermo sits on in his studio and doodles and draws on over the course of 3 to 6 months. Then the tabletop is taken off the table and placed and stretched on another canvas, and then shown in a series of 18 at a time. So I showed the works from about 2005 to 2012 at the Drawing Center. What I was interested in with Guillermo is Guillermo's primarily known as a painter, but he does make works on paper, he does make some drawings, but his works on paper often were inkjet prints of stadium seating plans, which then he dipped in water, and so that the inkjet would kind of bleed. My sense was, after talking to Guillermo in 2008, when I went to Argentina to give some lectures and visit studios, was that this was actually his drawing practice. The tabletops themselves have a lot of information, including my phone number and email and home address. So anytime anyone came to the studio, you sat at that table and he used it as a kind of place to document the ebb and flow of the studio. In the film that we made, there's a very funny part of the film where him and his assistant are counting out what looks like $1 million, but it's, of course, Argentinian peseta, not that much money. They're buying some stretchers, and his gallerist called me and said, "You're going to have to cut that out of the film. It looks like they're making a drug deal." But, you know, it was kind of, to me, very illustrative of, again, how the table operated in his studio. Here's an example of a completed diarios, and here is a detail of that, which has a list of potentially titles of paintings. So again, by showing these works that exist, and also, sorry, the other thing I want to mention is that the tables, the tabletops, which are canvas, are mostly discarded paintings, so paintings that Guillermo cannot complete. Oftentimes they go back 10 to 15 years in his career. He keeps them around, and it is about kind of a reclamation project. Guillermo also uses the diarios to deconstruct all the paintings that he's working on at that time. So oftentimes he's looking at the new painting and he's making drawings and kind of moving away from that and trying to come up with a new idea. So it is an interesting process that he's using, where drawing is not a stand-in, or it's not even on the way to making paintings. He's actually using the drawing to move to the next idea and move away from the painting that he's working on at the present. Informational, notational, and diagrammatic drawings, which I think is very much related to my brain in my inkstand exhibition. Nina Samuels and I have had many conversations about this particular area. The Drawing Center has spent a lot of time over the past couple of years, and also throughout the history of the organization, dealing with these kinds of drawings. I do think that there is a lot of I don't want to say controversy, but surely, you know, there's a lot of questions about whether or not this can be considered artwork. And I'm very happy, and I was really happy when I saw the exhibition today, that Cranbrook is taking the risk here and putting these out there as drawings. And I think we actually have a lot to learn from these kinds of drawings. So an old friend that I saw today was the Mark Lombardi drawing, the Oliver North drawing. Mark Lombardi had his big show at the Drawing Center and then was in the Whitney Biennial. At the show at the Drawing Center, Mark's work was basically about conspiracy theory and about putting together very complex ideas. I mean, to be totally frank, I think Mark figured out the SNL scandal before anyone else did. I don't know exactly where he was getting his information. Sadly, Mark committed suicide, and the story goes that when he had the show at the Drawing Center, the FBI showed up and people started looking at them very carefully, and he felt quite paranoid because he was getting a lot of pressure and people were asking him how he was putting this information together. His drawings tend to be networks of ideas, and if you look at them very carefully, they're quite amazing as mental maps, and also in terms of the connections that he makes that are primarily invisible to the naked eye and also to the media. The Phil Jackson sketches that Nina has in her show, I don't want to take credit for them, but I saw these in the New York Times, and I posted on Facebook that maybe I would do a show with Phil Jackson of his basketball drawings of the different plays. Of course, being from New York, I'm a Knicks fan. I hate the Bulls, so it was going to be a little problematic. It was kind of a half joke, and then Nina immediately sent something on Facebook and said, "You're really going to do that show?" And I said, "No, I'm not." But I said, "You should call his agent, and you should put these works in the exhibition at Cranbrook." So I'm also very happy to see them, and I think, again, the idea of where drawing sits in other disciplines, and also within, for that matter, within the realms of sports and performance, how drawing can actually show movement, ideas, thinking, etc. The exhibition that I have up right now at the Drawing Center, the Ferran Adria Notes on Creativity, has gotten very good reviews, not so good reviews, and has been fairly controversial. The idea that we could have an exhibition of a chef who is not trained as an artist. My feeling about this exhibition is I'm not saying that Ferran Adria is an artist. I'm not saying that chefs are artists. What I am saying is that Ferran uses visual systems as the lingua franca of his kitchen and as a method of communication. And he was very smart. If you know anything about El Bulli, the meal was that I had in 2010. It was a 37-course meal. It started at 8. It ended at 2:30 in the morning. It was food that disappeared on the table. It was boxes that were opened and you smelled it. So the whole idea of the meal was like a performance art piece. I think Ferran is an incredible thinker, and I am very committed to this idea that Ferran is actually trying to visualize what creativity is, and that it would be incredibly useful for anyone in any field that does something creative to look at these works. If you evaluate them aesthetically, the show will fail. If you evaluate it at the idea of thinking and the idea of what creativity is, I think you'd find it to be quite engaging. Again, Matt Mullikin. Matt Mullikin does a lot of bulletin board drawings, and these drawings are often curated, self-curated by him. So if you buy one of these pieces, Matt just simply pins a bunch of things on a bulletin board, and that's what you get. A lot of times with Matt, and there are quite a few artists that I've been working with recently, Matt Mullikin will talk to you for 2 hours about the idea of virtual reality, and then at the end of that 2 hours, he'll say, just give me a piece of paper, I'm going to make you a drawing that explains it all. So for Matt, I think drawing kind of comes in when language breaks down, and even maybe when the image breaks down. The same with Paul McCarthy. I've been spending some time with him in LA. I don't know if anyone really understands Paul's process, but all of Paul's films are basically drawn. They're consolidated in folders. Paul is dyslexic, so actually he can't really write in sentences, but he makes a lot of flowcharts and kind of trees, and then him and his son put them into folders, and then those folders are given to a cinematographer, and the cinematographer has to interpret all of the visual information. But one of the other parts of the process of Paul's work is he does what he calls conversation drawings. So if you sit with Paul McCarthy, he often will take out his notebook and he starts making drawings for you to explain what he's trying to tell you about. So in some ways, Mullikin and McCarthy, I think, are working in similar vein. I made this exhibition of Greta Magnan and Grossman. It's the first time the Drawing Center ever showed industrial design drawings. I have to say my staff wasn't too interested in these drawings at all. However, for me, I've worked in the design field and surely have looked at a lot of design drawings. Grossman, it's a great story. Swedish designer comes to the United States, to LA, starts to buy property on the hillsides, and then designs furniture for the mass market, and then eventually starts to build on the hillsides these cantilevered houses that she would sell to you with all of her furniture in it. So one of the earliest modernist female architects, and was mentioned in art and architecture more than 14 times in a decade. She then disappears, moves to San Diego, and actually kind of doesn't disavow her career, but really never does much about it. These drawings were in an old barn that one of her cousins had, and they were found. And I was very interested because Greta Grossman won in 1952 for the clamshell lamp that she made, the Cobra lamp, the MoMA Good Design Award. And her drawings are very much about technology, about style, about innovation, about actually using new techniques and new materials. And it does take some time to read industrial design drawings, but it was a first foray, and I thought actually it was a blind spot for our institution that we hadn't done that up until that point. Visionary architecture is something the Drawing Center has had a long history with. We did a big exhibition of Friedrich Keesler's drawings. Keesler, of course, is an architect who really only built one structure and a couple of other things that don't exist anymore. Primarily, the Endless House was something that he worked on for many, many, many years. And it's fascinating to think about an architect like Keesler, like Constant, maybe like Lebbeus Woods. We'll be taking that exhibition, which is right up the road here in East Lansing at the Broad Museum. I think that for me, there's a book by Robin Evans called The Projective Cast, and in that book he talks a lot about the way that architectural drawings can precede engineering. That in order to kind of get beyond our parameters of what is buildable, that drawing is the only method in which we can do that. So Keesler and some of these other visionary architects, I think, use drawing in a very interesting way to find new forms and new ways in which we can think about shelter, the environment, maybe technology, and maybe the ethics and morals of building in the environment, because you can also draw out the full environment in which the building exists. This is actually the installation of the Keesler show, strangely distorted, I don't know why, but we didn't show any of the works on the wall. Keesler was known to like cantilever a painting in a corner on a baseball bat so that you could kind of maneuver it. He had a lot of display furniture where you can kind of pick something up and put it and move it around. We made the endless table. We had architects design it and architects, and all of the works kind of went around this table. And so there were different categories and areas that you could look at. Another exhibition that I worked on is Paul Rudolph's drawings for the Lower Manhattan Expressway. These drawings are probably the most maligned drawings in all of architecture in the 20th century, building on the Moses plan to tear down Soho and connect the east side to the west side through superhighways, futuristic buildings. After Jane Jacobs kind of killed the Moses plan in 1968, the city commissioned Rudolph and Ulrich Franzen to revisit the idea through the Ford Foundation. And in 1970, they went to propose these projects to probably Abe Beam or maybe Lindsay at the time. Of course, the city was totally bankrupt. And these are the largest scale drawings of what urban planning could have looked like. This is actually a drawing looking at the Williamsburg Bridge from Delancey Street of a whole series of prefab buildings in which your apartment would be lifted up by a crane and inserted into this concrete structure, so that it would be something that if you bought an apartment in this building, it wouldn't actually exist until you paid for it and purchased it, and it would be slotted in. This drawing has been shown a lot. It's owned by MoMA. But I went to the Library of Congress and found 400 drawings from the Rudolph archive that had never been taken out of their tubes since they were donated. And I worked with the archivist over the course of about 6 months. And we photographed and documented a lot of these works and showed them at Cooper Union with actually the model that was lost, that was built in his studio, that was about 15 by 25 feet long. Of the whole, all of New York City and of the whole Rudolph plan that the Cooper Union students had worked on for about 6 months. Yanis Xenakis, another exhibition that we did, architect, composer, visionary. I had personally met Xenakis at UC San Diego when I was a student there. Xenakis is primarily known for actually building the Phillips Pavilion with Le Corbusier and also designing La Tourette, the monastery in Lyon in France. But Xenakis turned away from engineering and studied with Messiaen in Paris, went to the conservatory, and started making music based on mathematical equations in about 1953. Also based a lot on his understanding of engineering and structure so that he could see the relationship of sound to form. In the Xenakis archive, I found many, many drawings like this that would go on for hundreds and hundreds of pages. Xenakis, as a composer, had to see the music first and actually had to make the music and the composition by plotting out points or using Brownian mathematics or stochastic mathematics, very complicated formulas and algorithms. And then he would turn that into music on the staff. He also was the kind of godfather of the Fax Machine, which is one of the first tablets in which musicians could draw, and those drawings would become sound, depending on the parameters that you set. So, drawing and technology, the last section. We've been looking a lot, again, at the idea of the relationship of film to drawing. This is Robert Breer Blazes. All of these works are actually small index cards that Breer would draw and then put them together through stop animation. We have a collaboration with this institute called Middlesbrough Institute of Modern Art in the UK, and the Drawing Centre in Mima won £1 million to put together a collection of North and South American drawings over the time of 2007 to 2012. And we were very fortunate to be able to buy Robert Breer's original drawings for '66, which is a film, and also the original 16mm film itself. For me, Breer represents, again, this kind of relationship between drawing and film, and I think it's important. We showed his work in the Drawing on Film show. In Nina's show, she also has a fax piece, but we had done a show called Fax in 2007, where we invited 100 artists from around the world to fax into our gallery a drawing. They could do it any time during the run of the show. Then we made a notebook, and we sent the show around the world through ICI, the International Curators Group. And each time that the show went to a new location, they could invite 10 artists to fax in work. The thing that's interesting about the fax machine is actually, as a kind of machine, it's really a drawing machine, if you understand the technology behind it. And it was absolutely fascinating. I mean, this piece is Olaf Westphalen, an artist who has a great sense of humor, and this is how to set your fax machine on fire by creating continuous loop fax that would just keep on faxing all day. So he sent that to us, and I thought it was kind of with a good sense of humor. Jack Whitten had done the original IBM residency in 1972, where he was given a Xerox machine in his studio, and Jack made some incredibly beautiful Xerox carbon drawings, which I was also fortunate to buy some of those for Mima. So we asked him to think about the fax machine, and he participated in the exhibition as well. We also worked with Alexander Singh, a young artist who's 35. Alexander's work is all about the idea, again, of source material, computer images. His whole exhibition, even though there were drawn aspects, he would print out a piece of paper with something, or Xerox something from an encyclopedia, hand draw on it, bring it back into the computer, overlay another image, draw it on it again, print it out, scan it back in. So these images often have 5 or 6 layers to them. And we did something called assembly instructions, in which he did 7 interviews with different people from different fields, and then created a visualization of those interviews. But the interviews themselves were not straight interviews, because if you start to read them, all of a sudden in one interview, him and Marc-Olivier Waller, the curator from the Palais de Tokyo, are all of a sudden talking to Picasso, so you know that this is fictionalized. But what I was interested in is this idea of the visualization of dialogue, and how conversations might look if you were to visualize them. Also, I think with Alexander's work, there's a very interesting language and lexicon that he's using, and sometimes that lexicon and those images are appearing in multiple dialogues. So you start to kind of understand some of the connections between the works. Lastly, I'm just going to point to some things that we're doing now or planning on doing. We've been working a lot with performance. I showed you the Afuna Vigeti performance. We have a show coming up in March of Rashad Newsom, an African-American artist who has done some work with Vogue dancers. And the next iteration is the Vogue dancers actually have sensors on their bodies now in the costumes, and he's making drawings of their movements. So he will perform one night the dance performance at the Drawing Center, and then we will print out the results and put them on the wall, and that will be up for a couple of days. Andrea Bowers and Suzanne Lacey are going to do a show called Drawing Lessons, also in March. Suzanne Lacey is now 70, an artist who didn't have any traditional Beaux-Arts training. She doesn't know how to draw. So she once said to Andrea, "I'd really like to learn how to draw." So Andrea is going to teach her how to draw at the Drawing Center. And this will be a kind of open-ended drawing lesson where there'll be many things discussed, and students and other people who come into the Drawing Center will be able to engage in these lessons over 10 days in March. We worked with an artist named William Engelin last session. William is an artist, visual artist, but works with music. He makes handwritten scores, which then he crumples or folds. He collaborates with quartets or percussion ensembles, and we brought him together with a percussion ensemble called Talajan in New York, and he created a new piece of music which they performed in our gallery. We recorded, and then when you went down into the gallery, there were the scores on music stands and the recorded sound. Terry Smith is an artist who usually kind of breaks into abandoned buildings and makes very large-scale drawings in those buildings. We commissioned Terry to work with us for the new museums project called Idea City, and Terry made 4 sanctioned drawings and probably about 20 unsanctioned drawings in locations around the East Village. And then he did a walking tour with multiple groups over the course of the festival of on 2 days. We also documented all the drawings and then later had a small show in our gallery called The Lab, where Terry revealed all the other secret drawings and the ones that were not sanctioned. In terms of illustration, it's also a little bit of a blind area for us. We've never done a show about cartoons. We haven't showed Crumb or any of those artists, but we are going to work with Tommy Unger next year. Unger is an artist who did a lot of children's books. You may remember The Three Robbers kind of in the 60s. Then he came to New York, did these incredibly erotic drawings, was accused of being a pedophile, and then his publisher dropped him, and he was no longer allowed to make children's books. He moved back to Europe and started doing political cartoons for newspapers and posters, and then drew a lot for the Village Voice in the kind of 80s and 90s. So we're going to do a full retrospective of the children's books, the erotic drawings, and the political drawings. And I think, again, to try to engage with the idea of illustration. Animation and digital drawing, I've shown you a lot of things that we've been looking at. The lab gallery that we have now downstairs after our renovation is a spot for much more experimental work, and we are starting a new program called Open Sessions. We've just announced 50 artists that will be working with the Drawing Center. These are actually artists, architects, urban planners, landscape architects from a wide variety of disciplines who are going to be exploring the idea of what drawing is. There will be a series of shows and one big culminating show at the end of the second year. So that concludes the lecture. I hope it's a kind of varied, textured look. You may or may not agree with many of the things that I've said, but for me it's important that to run the Drawing Center, I do want to run an institution in which we are questioning the very nature of the medium that we're supposed to look at. It would be terrible, I think, for us to be kind of existential and say that drawing is only works on paper and only made with pencil. And so it's been a very interesting 7 years to be the director of this institution, and I hope that today you've seen some things that maybe you hadn't seen before, so thank you. And I think that, Greg, did you want to say a couple of words?